Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Well, continuing on with my series of videos on science fiction cinema, now entering into the 1980s, and I'll start out talking about one of the biggest films of the 1980s, and that would be The Empire Strikes Back. This is the Blu-ray set here of the original Star Wars trilogy. Of course, Empire Strikes Back was the sequel to the very successful Star Wars that came out in 1977, and even to this day, Empire is still considered maybe the best of all the Star Wars films, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, specifically what makes this Star Wars film really stand out from the rest. So anyway, just to give a little bit of background, so George Lucas, step back, he did not direct this film, although he wrote the script or initial versions of the script, hired Lee Brackett, who she was a famous genre writer, science fiction, westerns, fantasy, and she wrote the initial draft of the film, and then Lucas revised her draft, and Lee Brackett passed away during the drafting process, and then Lawrence Kasdan was brought in to do another reworking of the script. So really interesting backstory to how the sequel was written. And there was also a book written, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, by Alan Dean Foster, which was sort of a continuation of the original film, by my understanding. Lucas had planned to possibly adapt that novel as a sequel because it was much lower budget. But anyway, the first film was a huge hit, and production quickly began on what became The Empire Strikes Back. And, there's been a lot of commentary on this film, and I really don't need to go over the entire plot other than to pick it up where we're at, maybe a few years after the first film. It's never giving anything specific. The rebellion is still struggling. We start out on the ice planet of Hoth. We have Darth Vader, who is relentlessly trying to hunt down the rebellion, specifically Luke Skywalker, during their encounter during the trench run during a previous film. And we have the characters split up then. We have Han and Leia and Chewbacca and C-3PO are off in the Millennium Falcon. Luke goes off to Dagobah to get his Jedi training from Yoda. And then the climax of the film, where the storylines all come together at Bespin, okay, the city in the clouds, as it said, and that's where we have the historic confrontation between Luke and Darth Vader, where, of course, a major plot point is revealed of the Star Wars saga. And so that's, and this film, in that it ends on a uncertain note, where the good guys, or the good side from the last film, has been defeated. We end this on a somber note. We have a lot set up at the end for the sequel. Is Darth Vader really Luke Skywalker's father? Will the rebellion survive? Han Solo, who is captured and frozen by Jabba the Hutt. Will Han Solo come back? So there's one of the great things about the ending of the film is that there's so many open-ended questions where anticipation for the next film is just going to be off the charts, and that was impressive, quite impressive, what this sequel managed to do. As I said, this was directed by Irvin Kershner, who was a former professor of George Lucas's at Southern Cal, I would assume. Kershner had been a director for hire for Hollywood movies, and I've seen a fair number of his films, and he never made a great film prior to Empire. I've seen The Eyes of Laura Mars, which he made a few years before, which is a really good thriller. Script by John Carpenter, by the way. So Kershner was brought on, and listening to the commentary track of the film, Kershner's real strength, I think, in this movie was getting the right emotions out of each scene, maintaining the pace of the scenes, but making sure that each scene had the right emotional beats to it, and that really comes out in his commentary. And I think maybe what gives this film a real edge over some of the other Star Wars films, where the character arcs in this movie are very strong. And we also have the structure of the movie is interesting too, where the big battle set pieces come at the beginning of the film, in the first third of the film, and really after that, it's more of a character-driven story, whether it's the love story with Han and Leia, Luke getting his training, and of course the conflicts that come at the end of the film. So it's structured in an interesting way, and yeah, and it's the settings are very distinct, and I want to say a little bit more about that. You know, this is a film where I should talk about the music. I mean, this is the John Williams. Once again, a lot of people consider this the best score of all the Star Wars films, where we get the Imperial March by John Williams. Yoda's theme is iconic in the film as well. The love story theme with Han and Leia. So there's so many incredibly melodic moments of music. During the asteroid chase scene where Han Solo flies the Millennium Falcon into the asteroid field, the music is just stunningly good for that scene. So this is, and it's a quite different score from the first film, where it's almost a little more bombastic, a little more emotional. You know, the first film kind of has that epic, pulpy feel to it, and this one is more emotional and bombastic, and really just almost perfectly hits the emotions of all those scenes to go along with Kirshner's emphasis on character development throughout the movie. So the score is really incredible, and I was listening to a podcast about the score, and it was talking about how it's the most operatic score of all the Star Wars films, where you can almost put lyrics to the orchestral music as the story is told. So that's very narrative-driven, operatic score. So just quite impressive. And there's so many moments in this film, as I said, where the music is just just overpoweringly incredible. You know, and the special effects are a big step up from the first film as well, where everything feels a little more streamlined, a little more cleaner, a little more not quite as. There's almost like a homemade quality to the effects of the first film, and this film feels almost a little more professional in the way that the special effects are used. There's more stop motion effects. The space sequences look more realistic, if that's possible. So there is, you can tell just the amount of progress made in effects between the first and second film. I believe the special effects earned a special Oscar as well for The Empire Strikes Back. So it's almost as if all the elements of the movie, like the script is sharper, the performances are sharper. Everyone really just brought it, you know. And we know this was a troubled production in some ways, where there was some labor disputes, some dissatisfaction with the actors. Lucas, who was producing, was concerned that Kirshner was working too slow. Lucas had put up his personal fortune, all the profits he'd made from Star Wars, into financing this film, so he had a lot running on it as well. And the pressure on Kirshner to responsible for directing this film, where it could lead to, you know, if it had failed, it would have been quite a disaster. So there's that as well. And reading about the film, and there is a really good analysis. This is a recent one. This is one of the BFI series books, The Empire Strikes Back. Great cover art there of the film, and Rebecca Harrison is the author of this book, who is a film scholar. And you know, it's kind of difficult to, I think, bring a little bit new analysis to a movie that's been analyzed so much. But some of the points she made in the book, I think, are interesting. And I just mentioned a few of those. One is how the movie uses unstable environments a lot to go along with the story of this being the characters really put into difficult situations. For instance, like Hoth the planet Hoth, the ice planet, is a very unstable environment, and that goes on with Dagobah, the swamp planet. Once again, very unstable, very dangerous. And then the gas planet or Bespin, or the planet in the skies, where there's a fragility to the infrastructure. So just that the way the settings in the film reinforce that theme of the danger that the characters are in. And there's a lot of the visual style of the film reinforces that too. There's a lot of diagonal shots, or where the screen is off center a bit. A lot of the scenes in the Millennium Falcon are like that. There's a lot of scenes of Luke hanging upside down, whether it's with the Wampa creature at the beginning, or after trying to escape Darth Vader at the end. He's hanging on the antennas or whatever there. So there's a lot of the geometry of the film is purposely jarring and kind of off center. Even the Millennium Falcon itself is really a unstable environment in the film too, because it keeps breaking down throughout the movie, and it's unreliable, and they're always having to fix it all the time, which once again reinforces that theme of peril throughout the film that the characters are in. There's a little bit more shades of gray in terms of the morality of this movie, where there's reds and blues on both sides, the rebellions and the Empire, so there's a little bit of moral uncertainty there. The whole good versus evil theme is also complicated a bit, reinforced by Darth Vader's revelation, and just some of Luke's choices as well are a lot morally complicated in the film. For instance, where he decides to leave Yoda and go try to rescue his friends, which kind of led to, which he ended up not really helping anybody, and kind of leading to his own it was like a youthful mistake on Luke's part to leave his training. And so there's a lot of and Lando Calrissian, the character played by Billy D. Williams, who brings a strong presence in the final third of the film, is also a morally compromised character throughout. And of course, Lando eventually does the right thing, but we also, once again, there's a little more ambiguity and complexity there. And even Darth Vader, who, this is probably the movie where Darth Vader is the most cruelest, where he's almost comically disposing of his underlings, and because they mess up, you could die. But there's also, we have the Emperor Palpatine introduced in this film, who is controlling Darth Vader. So even Vader there's a little bit, he's not just this thoughtless enforcer. There's a more complexity brought to Vader's character in the film too, which it does a great job of. So yeah, and I know not to get into this again, but the way Lucas made some changes, not as many revisions as he did with the original with Empire, but he did change the Emperor. There was a different actor in the original film, and Ian McDiarmid was brought in to reshoot that scene with the Emperor, which I guess that was his prerogative, Lucas's. But that moral uncertainty theme, mentor, it's a great story about mentorship, which we have in the first film with Obi-Wan and Luke, where Obi-Wan is a wise master guiding Luke along through his journey away from Tatooine and introducing concepts of the Force to Luke. But Yoda, and the whole thing with Yoda, the way the character is introduced is brilliant, and Frank Oz and the way he operated the puppet and the voice, it's all just incredible work. And the fact that this entire movie really hinged on the puppet working, where audiences would accept a puppet as a real character. That's, once again, that's a big risk, but it really paid off in the end. One of the great characters in the Star Wars mythology. And Yoda's a different mentor than Obi-Wan as well, where he's challenging Luke a lot. He's always testing Luke, whether it's psychologically or physically or spiritually. It's almost like a higher level teacher that he's getting with with it. Obi-Wan's like the introductory teacher, but now we're getting into the more advanced stages of the Force with Yoda, and who is much older and wiser than Obi-Wan as well. So the film does a great job of that, and the way Yoda challenges Luke about Luke's arrogance, about heroism and technology. Once again, when in that scene where Luke goes to that challenge where he fights the phantom Darth Vader in the swamp, Luke brings his weapons. That's his first impulse. So that mistake and his belief in technology and his like just the way Luke views what it means to be strong and heroic is really challenged by Yoda, and that brings a whole different dynamic, I think, in terms of mentors and that idea in the film as well. And I think, the first film as well was criticized for the lack of racial and diversity in the first film. Even gender diversity. I mean, there was Leia, really the lone female character in the first film. And I know in different incarnations of the script, Leia was kind of going to be the main character, protagonist of the series, but Luke kind of becomes the protagonist of the original trilogy, although that was never set in stone as well either. But maybe I'll hit on that idea or get on that later. But yeah, I mean, the first film was criticized for the lack of diversity. Now, I should mention, Lucas was entertained the idea of making the film in Japan. He wanted Toshiro Mifune to play Obi-Wan Kenobi, and if he had I think Mifune was his first choice, and if he had got him to play the role, he would have cast Japanese actors around him. So that would have really changed the dynamic of Star Wars, and it's really fascinating to think of. What if Toshiro Mifune had played Obi-Wan? I mean, that would have really brought a whole new dynamic to the first film anyway. I mean, Alec Guinness did a great job, but and it would have been a great callback to the influences on Star Wars with the Hidden Fortress and Yojimbo and those Kurosawa films. But the way it ended up, there was not diversity in the first film. So in here we do get Lando, a black character who plays a prominent role towards the end of the film. Leia as a character is given. She's primarily action driven, but we do have the love story with her and Han. But as I mentioned, this book points out when we get to the final stretch of the movie, Han has been frozen in carbonite. He's gone, and Luke has been seriously injured by Lord Darth Vader. So really, by the end, it's Lando, Leia, Chewbacca, and the droids who are driving the story. So there is like this, the characters who are kind of marginalized in the Star Wars universe are saving the main characters at the end of this film. So I thought that was a really interesting point that, like I said, brought out in the Harrison book. And the ending of the film too, as I talked about, is order restored? Is it not? And I think the way the film just kind of ends on that uncertain beat is really interesting too. So yeah, and one thing I'll add too about the original trilogy, where Empire feels the most evergreen, the most timeless of the original three, where you can watch the first Star Wars and it feels 70s. It shows its age, definitely, even despite Lucas's efforts to touch it up and make it better. And then Return of the Jedi, the third film, feels very 1980s for some reason. Yet Empire, it doesn't feel 1980. It just kind of feels timeless, and maybe that goes to just the script. Maybe a lot of it is owed to Kirshner's direction, where he focused on character and those types of themes give Empire its status as one of the best Star Wars movies. And I really think all the Star Wars movies to follow have really been chasing Empire Strikes Back as far as trying to get to the magic of what that movie does. And even in other film franchises, like the second film, making the second film, Empire is usually looked at as the model, whether it's the X-Men series or the Avengers series, for the Marvel movies. They're all chasing Empire. They're all trying to kind of get the magic of what this film managed to accomplish. So it's interesting. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on Empire Strikes Back. Really a real thrilling way to start out the 1980s decade with science fiction. So thanks for watching. If you have thoughts on Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back, be great to hear them. But I think I'll be signing off for now. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.